A guest lecturer? Her? What's she going to teach us, Sergeant? How to properly file disability paperwork. The words, sharp and dripping with condescending amusement, echoed off the cavernous marble walls of the National Command Academy's rotunda. The crowd of senior cadets, a sea of crisp gray uniforms and polished brass, rippled with snickers and stifled laughter. Cadet Captain Drake Miller, the architect of the insult, stood with his arms crossed, a perfect specimen of arrogant privilege. He was the Academy's golden boy, the son of a general, with a jawline that seemed engineered for recruitment posters and a belief in his own manifest destiny that was as unshakable as the granite columns around them. The object of his scorn, Sergeant Eva Rostova, did not flinch. She sat in her standard-issue manual wheelchair at the base of the grand staircase, a monolithic structure of gleaming white marble that served as the Academy's symbolic heart. It was a ladder to greatness, and she was at the bottom, looking up. She wore a simple, unadorned service uniform, the fabric worn but impeccably clean, her rank stitched plainly on the collar. There were no ribbons, no medals, no indication of anything beyond her current, seemingly diminished station. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun, and her face was a study in neutrality, her expression giving away nothing. She simply waited, her hands resting calmly in her lap. They were not the hands of a clerk. They were scarred and calloused, the knuckles slightly swollen, the fingers long and steady, betraying a lifetime of familiarity with cold steel and disciplined action. But the cadets didn't see her hands. They saw the chair. They saw a broken soldier in a place dedicated to forging perfect weapons of war. But high above, on the third-floor balcony, partially obscured by a flag of the Republic, Colonel Thorne saw her stance, or rather, the profound lack of it. He saw the stillness, the almost predatory calm in her posture, and a cold dread, mingled with a furious anticipation, began to coil in his gut. He knew that kind of silence. It was the silence of a bomb before it detonates. If you believe that true strength is measured not by the noise you make, but by the impact you leave, type silence below. The echo of the cadets' laughter faded, replaced by the awkward, shuffling silence of a joke that has landed and is now awaiting a reaction. Eva Rostova offered none. Her gaze remained fixed on the middle distance, her breathing even and slow. She seemed less a person and more a feature of the architecture, a temporary statue of inconvenient reality placed in their cathedral of ambition. Drake Miller, emboldened by her passivity, took a step forward, his polished boots clicking with theatrical authority on the marble. He gestured grandly at the towering staircase. The entire ethos of this institution, Sergeant, is about ascent, climbing higher, overcoming obstacles. It's a metaphor. You see, he spoke to her as if she were a child, his voice laced with a mock pedagogical tone that made the other cadets grin. I'm just not sure you're physically equipped to grasp the concept. The cruelty was deliberate, a public dissection of her perceived weakness. He was performing for his audience, reinforcing his own status by diminishing hers. He, and his inner circle, a trio of equally arrogant cadets who orbited him like moons, moved closer. They formed a loose semicircle around her, their physical presence a wall of youthful, ignorant power. They were bigger, stronger, and in their world that was all that mattered. They were the future, and she, in their eyes, was the discarded past. One of them, a lanky cadet named Jensen, nudged the front wheel of her chair with his boot. Maybe we should give her a hand, he sneered. A little push to get her started on her ascent. This was the moment the line was crossed. The air grew thicker, charged with a new, more venomous energy. The casual mockery was escalating into a physical threat. Eva's eyes, which had been distant, slowly shifted. They didn't land on Drake or Jensen, but on the polished toe of Jensen's boot, noting its position relative to her chair's axle. It was a fractional, almost imperceptible movement, the kind of micro-assessment a predator makes before a strike. She said nothing. Her silence was no longer passive. It was heavy, profound. It was a void that sucked the air and confidence from the room. The cadets felt it. Their smirks faltered slightly. They had expected tears or anger or a plea for them to stop. They had expected a reaction that would validate their power over her. This unnerving calm was not in their playbook. Drake, sensing his control of the moment slipping, felt a flash of anger. He needed to reassert his dominance. He stepped forward and did the unthinkable. He didn't just push the chair. He kicked it. His boot connected squarely with the frame, just behind the main wheel. The force, combined with Jensen's foot blocking the front, created a violent rotational torque. The wheelchair bucked and twisted, and then it went over. Time seemed to slow. The smooth, humming roll of the wheels was replaced by the ugly, scraping shriek of metal on marble. Eva was thrown from the chair, not in a chaotic tumble, but in a controlled, practiced fall. She tucked her body, rolling onto her shoulder to absorb the impact, a maneuver so fluid and instinctual it was utterly at odds with the helplessness of her situation. She came to rest on the cold floor, lying on her side, her legs inert beneath her. The wheelchair lay beside her, a mangled symbol of her vulnerability. A collective gasp went through the rotunda. The laughter died completely, replaced by a horrified, ringing silence. This had gone too far. This was no longer a joke. It was a brutal, public assault. From his vantage point, Colonel Thorne's face became a mask of cold fury. His knuckles were white where he gripped the brass railing. He did not move, not yet. He was watching her. Even now, on the floor, surrounded by her tormentors, Eva Rostova did not cry out. She did not look at them with hatred. With methodical, deliberate movements, she pushed herself up with her powerful arms, her torso and shoulders displaying a shocking strength. She ignored the overturned chair. She ignored the stunned faces of the cadets. She simply sat there on the floor, looking up the staircase, her expression unchanged. It was the most profound act of defiance the Academy had ever witnessed. She had been kicked down, but she refused to be broken. Her silence screamed louder than any curse, a testament to a will forged in fires they couldn't possibly imagine. Her competence was in her control. Her power was in her refusal to grant them the satisfaction of her pain. They had revealed their character. She was about to reveal hers. The next day, the atmosphere in the Academy's Advanced Combat Simulation Center was thick with tension. The incident in the rotunda had spread like a virus through the barracks, and the story had already begun to curdle into a shameful legend. The senior cadets, including a visibly subdued Drake Miller, were assembled for their final capstone evaluation, a run-through of the infamous Hogan's Alley, a hyper-realistic, digitally augmented kill house known as the Crucible. It was a state-of-the-art training facility, a labyrinth of shifting walls, holographic civilians, and pop-up targets of such sophisticated AI that they learned from each team's mistakes. The objective was deceptively simple: rescue 2 high-value hostages from a fortified terror cell in under 10 minutes with 0 collateral damage. For a decade, no cadet team had ever achieved a perfect score. The instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Reyes, a hardened veteran with a face like a roadmap of old wars, paced before the main observation screen. "The rules are simple," he barked, his voice rough as gravel. "You go in hot. You neutralize all threats. You protect all non-combatants. You secure the package. You fail at any one of those, you fail the course. And trust me, you will fail." He wasn't being pessimistic. He was being realistic. The Crucible was designed to break people. It preyed on arrogance, punished hesitation, and exploited every flaw in a team's communication and strategy. Drake Miller's team was up first. They were the Academy's elite, the best of the best, and they entered the simulation with a practiced, aggressive swagger. They moved fast, stacking up on doors, shouting jargon-laced commands. It was a flawless display of what they had learned from textbooks. But the Crucible wasn't a textbook. Their aggression made them predictable. They breached the first room and were immediately funneled into a kill zone. Holographic civilians screamed and ran, and in the chaos, the cadets' triggered discipline vanished. They fired on a pop-up target that was holding a phone, not a weapon. A blaring siren filled the center, and red letters flashed on the main screen. Collateral damage. Mission failure. They had lasted 93 seconds. One by one, the other teams tried and failed. A team that was too cautious was cornered and systematically eliminated. A A team that split up was picked off one by one. Reyes's frustration grew with each failed attempt, his commentary becoming more and more acerbic. You're moving like clumsy cattle. You're thinking two-dimensionally. Is this the best this academy has to offer? The cadets in the observation room shifted uncomfortably. The confidence they had carried into the room had evaporated, replaced by the humbling reality of their inadequacy. Just as Reyes was about to dismiss them for the day, a quiet voice cut through the murmuring. Request permission to run the course. Sir, every head turned. Sergeant Eva Rostova sat in the back of the darkened amphitheater, her replacement wheelchair parked in the designated access space. She hadn't been on the official roster, merely listed as an observer for the day's exercises. A wave of disbelief, followed by a ripple of cruel snickers, went through the room. Drake Miller, who had been staring at the floor in shame, looked up, his face a mixture of shock and a flicker of his old arrogance. The idea was absurd, utterly preposterous. Reyes squinted into the darkness. Sergeant, this is a dynamic entry exercise for four-man fire teams. It requires mobility, speed, and... He trailed off, the unspoken words legs hanging heavy in the air. I'm aware of the parameters, Gunny, Eva replied, her voice perfectly even. I will run it solo. The snickers turned into outright, incredulous laughter. Solo? A woman in a wheelchair was going to attempt what their best fire teams had failed? It was beyond arrogant. It was insane. Reyes was about to dismiss her out of hand, but then his earpiece crackled. A single, authoritative voice spoke a short command. It was Colonel Thorne. Reyes's eyes widened slightly. He looked from the screen back to the quiet woman in the wheelchair. His expression shifted from annoyance to grudging curiosity. Fine, he grunted, a challenge in his voice. The range is yours, Sergeant. Show us what you've got. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a stunned, voyeuristic silence. No one knew what to expect, but every single person in that room, from the cockiest cadet to the most jaded instructor, leaned forward in their seat. The stage was set for either the ultimate humiliation or something they could not yet comprehend. The main screen flickered to life, showing a schematic of the crucible, now reset. A single blue icon, labeled Rostova, appeared at the entry point. The countdown clock began, 10 o'clock. Eva did not move immediately. While the cadets had stormed the entrance, she remained at the threshold, her chair perfectly still. On the screen, her vital signs were displayed, a heart rate of 62 beats per minute, as calm as a meditating monk. For a full 30 seconds, she did nothing but listen and observe, her head tilted slightly. The cadets fidgeted, mistaking her stillness for hesitation or fear. They were wrong. She was processing, absorbing the ambient sounds of the simulation, mapping the building in her mind through acoustics alone. Then, she began to work. Her movements were a study in economy and precision. She didn't use the standard issue carbine. Instead, she unclipped a heavily modified sidearm from a holster on her chair's frame. It was a pistol, but one with a long barrel, a sophisticated optical sight, and a custom-weighted stock she could brace against the chair's armrest. Her preparation was a quiet, fluid ritual. She checked the magazine, chambered around, and adjusted her optic with a series of minute practice clicks. She didn't need a team to breach the door. She accessed the simulation's control panel from a small datapad mounted near her hand and rerouted a nearby ventilation fan to create a sonic disturbance at the far end of the corridor. It was a simple, brilliant act of misdirection the cadets had never even considered. The AI threats inside, programmed to react to sound and movement, shifted their positions to investigate the noise. Eva watched their heat signatures move on her datapad, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. She had just reshaped the battlefield without moving an inch. Now, she entered. She didn't roll down the center of the hallway. She used the walls for cover, propelling her chair with one hand while her weapon remained up, steady, and ready in the other. Her progress was silent, the rubber wheels of her chair making no sound on the polished concrete floor. She reached the first corner, the same corner where Drake's team had been ambushed. She didn't peek around it. Instead, she pulled a small, polished mirror from her kit. the kind of simple, low-tech tool the cadets had deemed obsolete. With it, she scanned the entire room without exposing herself. She saw the two tangos, weapons raised, waiting. She calculated the angles. The first shot was fired through a small gap between a stack of crates and the wall. It was an impossible shot, a threaded needle of ballistic precision. The first target dropped, a single red pixel appearing on its holographic head. The second tango reacted, spinning toward her position, but Eva was already moving. She propelled her chair backward while firing 2 more rounds, a double tap to the center mass. The second target fell. The room was clear. She had neutralized 2 threats in under 3 seconds without ever entering the room. In the observation theater, a profound, deafening silence had fallen. Jaws were literally hanging open. Gunnery Sergeant Reyes was frozen, his hand halfway to his coffee cup, his eyes glued to the screen. Drake Miller looked as if he had seen a ghost. What they were witnessing was not just skill, it was artistry. It was a level of tactical thinking that was light years beyond their own. Eva continued her methodical, relentless advance. She didn't clear the building room by room like a blunt instrument. She treated it like a living organism, understanding its rhythms, its sight lines, its weak points. She used ricochets, shooting a metal panel on the ceiling to drop a target on a catwalk above her. She bounced a flashbang grenade off 3 walls to blind an entire room of enemies before she even appeared in the doorway. She distinguished between the frantic movements of holographic civilians and the predatory stillness of the AI combatants, never once hesitating, never once making a mistake. She reached the final room where the 2 hostages were being held. 3 tangos remained. She didn't breach the door. She fired a single low-velocity round into the hinge, weakening it. Then, using a small, remote-detonated charge no bigger than her thumb, she blew the door not inward, but outward, away from the hostages, using it as a projectile to knock down the guard standing behind it. In the ensuing confusion, 2 more precise shots echoed, and the final 2 threats dropped. The simulation ended. A loud chime filled the center. On the main screen, the final score flashed in brilliant green letters. Mission complete. Time, 4:17. Threats neutralized. August 8th. Collateral damage, 0. Hostages secure. February 2nd. Score, perfect for a long moment. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. They simply stared at the screen, at the impossible result. They had come to see a broken soldier humiliate herself. They had instead witnessed a masterclass in warfare that would be studied at the academy for the next 50 years. Eva Rostova, alone in the center of the kill house, calmly holstered her weapon, her heart rate now reading a placid 60 beats per minute. Her work was done. Colonel Thorne did not wait for the stunned silence in the observation theater to break. He moved with a purpose that commanded the attention of every cadet in the room. He descended the amphitheater steps, his boots making sharp, authoritative sounds that cut through the thick atmosphere of shock. His face was granite, his eyes chips of ice. He didn't spare a single glance for the cadets he passed, his focus entirely on the main exit leading to the simulation floor. Gunnery Sergeant Reyes, finally shaking himself out of his stupor, saw the colonel approaching and immediately snapped to attention, his expression a mixture of awe and professional dread. "Colonel," he began, "I've never seen anything." Thorne raised a single hand, cutting him off. "Open the door." Gunny Reyes complied instantly, keying in the code to unlock the heavy steel door to the crucible. The hiss of the pneumatic seals breaking was the only sound in the vast room. Thorne strode through the doorway and onto the simulation floor. The cadets watched on a main screen as his digital icon appeared, moving with brisk strides toward the blue icon labeled Rostova. Eva had not moved from the center of the final room. She was reloading her weapon, her hands performing the familiar, comforting ritual with an absent-minded grace. She looked up as Thorne approached, her expression as neutral as ever. He stopped 5 feet in front of her. The cadets expected him to offer a hand, to congratulate her, perhaps to ask her how she had accomplished such a feat. He did none of those things. Instead, Colonel Thorne, a decorated combat veteran and the commander of the entire academy, a man who hadn't stood at full attention for anyone less than a 4-star general in 20 years, drew himself up to his full height. His back went ramrod straight, his chin tucked in, his hands rigid at his sides. He executed the sharpest, most formal salute of his entire career. It was a gesture of profound, almost reverent respect, a salute given not from a superior to a subordinate, but from one warrior to another, acknowledging a level of mastery that transcended rank and position. He held the salute, his eyes locked on hers. And then he spoke, his voice crisp and clear, carrying through the open door and into the observation room. "It is an honor to be in your presence again. Wraith," the name hung in the air, charged with meaning. Wraith. It wasn't a name, it was a call sign, a legend. The cadets exchanged confused glances. Drake Miller frowned, the name stirring a vague memory, a ghost story he'd heard from older soldiers. Thorn lowered his salute and turned to the bewildered gunnery Sergeant Reyes, who was standing in the doorway. "Gunny." Thorn's voice was now cold steel, all warmth gone. "Bring up Sergeant Eva Rostova's complete service record. Projected on the main screen. All of it. Level 5 clearance. I want every single one of these children to see exactly who they have been sharing a roof with." Reyes, his face pale, rushed back to the console. He typed in the command, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He had to override 3 separate security warnings, each one flashing dire threats about classified information. Then, the file appeared. The main screen, which moments before had displayed her perfect run, was now filled with a document so heavily redacted it was almost more black than white. But the parts that were visible were enough to steal the breath from every person in the room. Her name was at the top, Sergeant First Class Eva Rostova, and beside it, in parentheses, was the call sign. Wraith. The screen was a litany of impossible achievements, a testament to a life lived at the absolute apex of the military profession. The first entry was her unit designation, 7th Special Tactics Group, Phantom Cell. A wave of audible gasps swept through the cadets. Phantom Cell wasn't a real unit. It was a myth, a boogeyman story told to frighten new recruits. They were the ghosts the government didn't acknowledge, the operators sent to the places that didn't officially exist to fight the wars that were never declared. To the cadets, they were legends on par with King Arthur's knights. And one of them was sitting in a wheelchair not 50 feet away. Below there was a list of combat deployments, a string of location names that read like a history of the last decade's most brutal clandestine conflicts. Each one was a place from which few returned, and she had been to all of them, again and again. Then came the awards. The list scrolled on, a cascade of valor that was simply unbelievable. The Bronze Star with V4 Valor, not once but 5 times. The Silver Star, the nation's 3rd highest award for gallantry, 3 times. And then, near the top, was the one that made the entire room fall into a deathly hush, the Distinguished Service Cross. It was second only to the Medal of Honor. The citation for the award began to scroll across the screen, a sanitized but still harrowing account of an operation deep in enemy territory. It told of an overwhelming ambush, of a compromised position, of a heroic last stand. It described a lone operator holding off an enemy force of over 50 combatants for 6 hours, single-handedly covering the retreat of her entire team. It spoke of impossible marksmanship, of tactical genius under unimaginable pressure. And then came the final lines of the citation, detailing her final act of heroism on that day. It described how, with her position about to be overrun, she had used her own body to shield 2 younger, wounded soldiers from the blast of an incoming rocket-propelled grenade. The citation concluded, for her extraordinary heroism, her complete disregard for her own safety, and her unwavering devotion to her comrades, Sergeant Rostova is awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. The actions that resulted in the catastrophic, combat-related injuries to her lower body were directly responsible for saving the lives of every member of her team. The screen then showed her list of official qualifications. Master Marksman on 17 different weapons platforms. Expert in unconventional warfare. Level 4 Instructor in hand-to-hand combat. The list went on, a catalog of deadly expertise. Colonel Thorne let the information sink in. He turned his back on Eva and faced the doorway, his voice now a low, dangerous growl that carried across the room. For the last 2 days, he began, his eyes sweeping over the pale, horrified faces of the cadets. You have looked at this woman and seen weakness. You saw a wheelchair and a quiet demeanor, and your small, arrogant minds filled in the rest. You judged the book by its cover, and you found it wanting. You presumed to stand in judgment of a giant. He took a step toward them, his fury palpable. That woman you mocked, he said, pointing a thumb back at Eva, that clerk you laughed at has more combat hours than every instructor at this academy combined. She has faced down horrors you cannot even imagine in your worst nightmares. The uniform she wears, plain as it is soaked in more honor than all of your pristine gray dress uniforms put together. The scars on her hands were earned defending the very freedoms that give you the right to be so ignorant. His gaze settled on Drake Miller, pinning him in place. You, Cadet Miller, spoke of ascent, you spoke of climbing higher. Let me tell you about ascent. Ascent is pulling your wounded comrades up a mountainside under heavy fire. Ascent is holding the line when every instinct tells you to run. Ascent is sacrificing the use of your own body so that others might live to see their families again. He paused, letting the weight of his words crush them. She didn't need to climb your petty marble staircase. She has already ascended to a place of honor that you will never reach in 1,000 lifetimes. You're not fit to speak her name, let alone stand in her presence. You're dismissed, no one moved. They were frozen, shattered by the revelation. They had not just insulted a sergeant. They had desecrated a living monument. The quiet woman in the wheelchair was not a broken soldier. She was a titan, a legend, a wraith. And they were nothing. The story of what happened in the Crucible didn't just spread, it detonated. Within an hour, the entire National Command Academy was buzzing with the tale. The words Wraith and Rostova were spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the mess halls, the libraries, and the training fields. The video of her perfect run was leaked from the Simulation Center's archives and became the Academy's most watched piece of footage, dissected and studied by cadets and instructors alike. It was like a foundational myth being born in real time. For Drake Miller and his cohort, the consequences were swift and severe. They were summoned before a formal disciplinary board, with Colonel Thorne himself presiding. It was not a trial. It was a reckoning. They stood at rigid attention, their faces pale and drawn, as Thorne laid out the chasm between their conduct and the code they had sworn to uphold. There was no defense. There were no excuses. They were stripped of their leadership positions, assigned months of grueling punishment details, and a permanent, damning letter was placed in their service jackets, a black mark that would follow them for the rest of their careers. But for Drake, the formal punishment was nothing compared to the internal one. His entire worldview, built on a foundation of privilege, arrogance, and superficial judgment, had been obliterated. He felt a shame so profound it was a physical weight. The day after the hearing, he sought out Sergeant Rostova. He found her in a small, unused classroom that had been converted into a workshop, where she was meticulously cleaning her custom sidearm. He stood in the doorway for a full minute, unable to speak, until she finally looked up, her eyes calm and questioning. He stepped inside, stopped 10 feet from her, and came to attention. "Sergeant," he began, his voice cracking with an emotion he couldn't control. "Mom, there's nothing I can say. What I did, what I said, it was unforgivable." Tears welled in his eyes, tears of genuine remorse. "I was arrogant. I was a fool. I saw your chair, and I saw nothing else. I am so deeply, truly sorry for my actions, for my disrespect. I failed as a cadet, and I failed as a human being." He took a shaky breath, prepared for her to dismiss him, to tell him his apology meant nothing. Eva finished reassembling her weapon with a final, satisfying click. She looked at him, her gaze analytical, not emotional. She was assessing him, just as she had assessed the kill house. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Assumptions are a liability, cadet. In the field, they create blind spots. Blind spots get people killed. You saw what you expected to see, and you missed the actual threat." She paused, her words sinking in. "Your apology is a start. But words are easy. Actions are what define a soldier. You have been given a harsh lesson. The question is not whether you are sorry. The question is what you will do with that lesson. Will you let it break you, or will you let it rebuild you into something better? She didn't offer forgiveness, not in the traditional sense. She offered him a challenge, a path forward. For Eva, redemption wasn't about absolution. It was about applied learning. It was the most profound act of grace Drake had ever received. He nodded, wiping the tears from his face. I understand, ma'am, he said, his voice now steady. I will not waste this lesson. He saluted her, a gesture now filled with a genuine, painful respect. She gave him a curt, almost imperceptible nod in return. He turned and walked away, no longer the arrogant golden boy, but a humbled cadet who had just been given a second chance to become the man he was supposed to be. The legend of the Wraith of the Academy was just beginning. The change in Drake Miller was not immediate, but it was profound. The swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity. He threw himself into his studies and training with a ferocity born of shame and a desperate need for self-improvement. He was the first to arrive at physical training and the last to leave the library. He no longer sought the spotlight. Instead, he was often seen helping struggling underclassmen, patiently explaining complex tactical concepts or offering a hand during grueling obstacle courses. His former cronies, cast out from the academy's social elite, either fell into obscurity or began to emulate his newfound humility. He was rebuilding himself, piece by piece, using the lesson Eva had taught him as his blueprint. At Colonel Thorne's insistence, Eva Rostova became a permanent fixture at the academy, appointed as a special advisor on tactical doctrine. She didn't run classes in a traditional lecture hall. Instead, she held sessions in the places where theory met reality. On the windswept firing ranges, in the disorienting confines of the kill house, and on the muddy fields of the land navigation course. Her teaching style was as unconventional as her combat methods. She rarely spoke. Instead, she would create problems for the cadets, scenarios designed to shatter their preconceived notions. She taught marksmanship not by focusing on the target, an external object, but by focusing on the shooter's breathing, their heart rate, their mental state, the internal factors that determined the shot's success before the trigger was ever pulled. She taught strategy by forcing them to operate with extreme limitations. No comms, no night vision, one magazine of ammunition, forcing them to rely on pure intellect and observation. Her primary teaching location became the observation deck overlooking the Crucible, the very place where her legend had been forged. The cadets nicknamed it Rostova's Perch. From there, she would watch them run simulations, and her feedback was brutal, concise, and always transformative. "Cadet," she would say over the comms, her calm voice cutting through the chaos of a failed run. "You breach the door because the manual says to breach the door. You fail to ask if the door was even the correct point of entry. You assumed the objective was inside the room. The real objective was to see if you were capable of thinking beyond the manual." Her lessons were less about tactics and more about a philosophy. Competence over confidence. Observation over action. Silence over noise. She was teaching them that the mind was the primary weapon and that every other piece of equipment was merely a tool to be used by a disciplined intellect. The cadets began to change. The culture of the academy, once dominated by the loud and the arrogant, began to shift. A new kind of leader began to emerge. The quiet professional, the one who listened more than they spoke, the one who measured success not in accolades, but in flawless execution. A symbolic artifact of her impact appeared on the main bulletin board in the cadet barracks. Someone had pinned a single, high-resolution image taken from the simulation footage. It was a picture of a single brass casing, frozen in mid-air, having just been ejected from Eva's sidearm. Below it, an anonymous hand had written. The sound of competence, the photograph became a touchstone, a reminder that the loudest moments are often preceded by the quietest preparation, and that true strength doesn't need to announce its presence. It simply performs its function, and the results speak for themselves. The legacy of Eva Rostova's time at the academy was not written in stone or cast in bronze, but was etched into the very soul of the institution. Years passed. The story of her confrontation in the Rotunda and her perfect run in the Crucible became a foundational piece of academy folklore, a cautionary tale told to every new class of cadets on their first day. It served as an immediate and powerful inoculation against the disease of arrogance. The marble staircase where she had been assaulted was no longer just a staircase. It was informally known as the Rostova Steps, a symbolic reminder that the path to true leadership was not about climbing over others, but about demonstrating an unassailable standard of character and skill. The Rostova Doctrine was now a mandatory part of the tactical curriculum. It was a series of principles focused on asymmetric thinking, mental discipline, and the weaponization of assumptions. Cadets studied her simulation run with the same academic rigor they applied to the great battles of history, analyzing her every decision, her every shot, her every moment of deliberate, calculated stillness. Her influence was most clearly seen in the field. A short, grainy clip from a soldier's helmet cam surfaced on a secure military network. It showed a young captain leading his platoon during a tense urban patrol. They were about to breach a building suspected of housing insurgents when the captain held up a hand, stopping his team. Instead of storming the front door, he led them around the back, pointing out a small, almost invisible ventilation shaft near the roofline, a subtle detail others would have missed. They used it as an entry point, completely surprising the enemy inside and resolving a dangerous situation without firing a single shot. The young captain was Drake Miller. He had not wasted his lesson. He had allowed it to rebuild him into the kind of leader Eva Rostova knew he could be, the kind of leader the academy was now designed to produce. Eva herself remained at the academy, a quiet, constant presence. She never wore a dress uniform, never displayed the rows of medals she was entitled to. She had become a living embodiment of her own teachings, a gray-haired oracle in a wheelchair who had become the institution's conscience. She never spoke of her own past, but she didn't have to. The reverence in the eyes of the colonels and generals who visited the academy and made a point to seek her out and salute her said it all. She had become more than a soldier, more than an instructor. She was a standard, a North Star by which a new generation of warriors navigated their moral and professional compass. Her presence ensured that the academy would never again mistake silence for weakness or a wheelchair for a crutch. They now understood. The chair was not a symbol of what she had lost. It was a throne earned in blood and fire, from which she taught the most important lesson of all. The grand marble staircase was never just a physical structure. It was a test of character, a filter designed to separate those who understood service from those who only understood status. The fall was not an act of humiliation, but an act of revelation, stripping away the superficial to expose the bedrock of true strength beneath. Eva Rostova's wheelchair was not a prison of confinement, but a crucible, a forge that had burned away the non-essential parts of a warrior, leaving only the pure, unadulterated core, a brilliant tactical mind, an unbreakable will, and a spirit of sacrifice that defined the very highest ideals of a soldier. Her legacy was not a monument to be looked at, but a mindset to be lived. It was the quiet confidence in the face of loud ignorance, the calm precision in the middle of chaos, the profound understanding that true power is not measured by the ability to climb, but by the strength to lift others. It lived on in the sharp eyes of a young lieutenant scanning for threats her peers could not see, in the steady hand of a medic under fire, and in the humble heart of a captain who remembered every single day that the greatest weapon he would ever carry was the lesson he learned from the woman they kicked down the stairs. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.